drive things off the wall.
That's us, man. 24/7.
You should expect the unexpected. I mean,
Make it known that this is all about being 100% authentic.
We are live now.
So with that being said, let's jump right in.
I want to kind of circle back to something dealing with domestic violence. I do want to kind of stay on that a little bit more because I think it's just really important. And there's another statistic that I was reading that it's pretty alarming as well. It said that 20 people per minute are physically abused by an intimate partner in the United States. And that equates to about 10 million women and men. They don't get as granular to, differentiate between how many women and how many men within that 10 million, but still that's just a very large number. And 20 people per minute, is just is what it is. It's just real life. It's unfortunate, but that's just how it is. I want to ask a question to the group about the domestic violence piece, but not necessarily from the women's perspective. And I don't want to sound misogynistic when I say this, but there are men that are being physically abused as well. But, what are you guys, what is your experience with that?
And mentally.
Because my thought would be, and I'm asking this because I want to be educated, is men don't normally want to kind of say, okay, they're being physically abused by their spouse, especially if it's a woman abusing them, because they don't want to feel like, quote unquote, they're a punk. So what is your experience?
Shot at the ego.
Yeah. So what is your experience, with that side of domestic violence?
Buddy, is Shani abusing you?
No, I'm everything is totally fine. We're good.
Well, it's interesting. That question comes up a lot. And so what has happened over the years is that we are seeing where the presence of really hypermasculinity that has been so socially accepted has always said to a man, first of all, you don't have permission to cry. You don't have permission to show vulnerability. You don't have permission to say that you're sad. You don't have permission to say that you're fearful. Because we've always been told that to be that, that's a girl, that's feminine, that's less than. And so what we have with men is this, is that either they are suppressing it or they're seeking other coping mechanisms. I mean, they're more likely to turn to alcohol, drugs, and other things in order to deal with it. However, having said that, what has opened up the door a little bit more for men to talk is because, today we track domestic violence statistics across the board. Mm-hmm. Years ago, you always heard about women. And it's interesting, as our society became more open, it changed a lot of the theories that we operated up under. Like, for instance, at once upon a time, by virtue of being a man, you was a potential perpetrator. And we said that the reason that we had so much domestic violence was because of male privilege, and that is still part of it. We'll also talk about this patriarchal dominance. Well, the problem is that when we became an open society and we start talking about same-sex relationship, we see that lesbian women, domestic violence rate is just as high as heterosexual type thing. Right. But it also opened the door for even same-sex men relationships now to have that conversation about being abused. It is still, and I want to make sure that I'm very careful in saying this, there still are not enough adequate services that address men that are being abused. You will find no men's shelter for domestic violence, no freestanding men's shelter for domestic violence in this country. Most of the time, if there is a man abused, our shelters only in the last 10 years really even start accepting men. And even inside of that, they're generally putting them in a relocation program or hotel, motel safety type of situation, because in our mind, we still identify the perpetrator as being male and the victim as being female, and that's not the case any longer. And so we have a long way to go. Men that do find help and support are going to generally find it from trusting individuals. And that's the reason why those entities out there, and I need to say it, the church need to be better educated. I mean, the brother need to be able to go to deep pastor, somebody, and be able to say, this is what's going on with me, and find help and not ridicule. Find help and not find re-victimization going on. So that's a lot of work to be done. And I will say this to you, I've seen men abused. I've seen men, and back in the mid 90s, I can recall working for a shelter, and a brother actually called the domestic violence shelter, and I asked him the phone. He hung up because like, oh, must be the wrong number. He called back again, and hey, I was the only one on the board, and I answered again, and he was frustrated. He hung up. He called back the third time, and out of nowhere, he just said, man, what am I supposed to do? I'm being abused. What am I supposed to do? And it was one of the first times in my life I recognized that, you know what, that wasn't a lot of work that had been done about how do we respond to men that are victims of domestic violence. Because once again, the nature and the dynamic of that abuse is generally different. A brother who restrains himself from retaliatory abuse, I commend him. And yet it's still, imagine a brother who grew up in a home that said, you don't touch women, you treat women with respect, and you try to adhere to that upbringing, but you're being beaten, you're being abused, and you find yourself really pitted against your very belief system, which is on a whole nother set of stressors and a whole nother set of issues right there. So once again, we're opening up that conversation more. And one of the things that I'm really pushing for is legislation that will stop so focusing on just gender-based bias, gender-based violence alone. And that's been a key word, gender-based violence. And we continue to look at gender-based violence, but we have to understand men are victims of domestic violence as well. And by no means are we saying at the same rate. But at what point does anyone deserve to be abused? Do we say, hey, not enough of them abused yet, let's wait till the numbers go up and we'll do something about it? No, we have to start changing the cultural norms and stop this cultural acceptance of those type of things.
Dr. Thicklin, I think you said something I was going to ask, the numbers of it all, because I agree. There's never any, men's help shelters for abuse. Do you think the numbers are as low as they are out of fear? Or do you think the numbers are as low as they are out of, it just doesn't happen frequently to, necessitate, having a shelter? Like I know guys who were verbally abused, or and emotionally abused, good friends of mine that suffered through it. And it's just like you said, they were raised in the houses where you don't put your hands on a woman, you don't do this, you don't do that. So they would suffer through it, Is there enough of a need, in your opinion, to not just, we know there's need to shift the treatment for it, but what about a shelter? Like, is there enough need for there to be all right, we need to have a dorm, a wing inside of a shelter that's for men who are abused?
I think there's enough need. I think it's hard to measure it because of the fact the conversation is not happening. The conversation is not being lifted enough. And it kind of goes like this: which comes first, the chicken or the egg? The reality is that it's out there. I've been currently binge watching a series called Made on Netflix. And it's interesting how it's a 10-part series dealing with domestic violence. And yet it's still, you never see him hit her. You never see it at all. But basically, she didn't even consider herself abused till she went to the shelter, and they began to tell her, you're emotionally abused, you're being traumatized, he's threatening you. And now she has a language for it, right? She has a name for it. And now she qualifies for all these services because she's got a name for it. Same thing must happen when it comes to men. Men don't have to be physically abused in order for us to then deem it as abuse. He can be mentally, emotionally, psychologically abused, even economically abused, considering the fact the earning power of women, especially among Black folks now these days. So we have to give them that language, and therefore, them feeling they're feeling bold enough, or feeling at least safe enough, is the word I want to use, to come forth and say so. Which means that we got to, once again, we got to destigmatize the way we look at it. So the stigma, once again, is deeply rooted in our social orientation of how we look at men. We have to move that needle because the fact, if not, I want you to understand that, and you're in the school system. I have been on campus and I see some girls, I mean, literally light these boys up. I mean, from punching to hitting and, and I'm like going, wow, what's going on here? But it's because of the fact we see the aggression happening more and more. When boys used to mess with girls, they would tell the little girl, oh, the reason he keeps doing it because he likes you. He likes you. So what do you say? Do you apply that same thing when girls beat up boys or slap boys around because she likes you? So once again, it goes back to the gender-based violence definition that we have. And we have to be willing to look at things as they are and not try to fit reality to our theory, but rephrase our theory to the realities of our times.
Crystal, you got a question you wanted to add, or you wanted to ask or add to the conversation?
Yeah, one for now and then one for later.
All
But
right.
the one for now is kind of the foundation of, or I guess you can wrap it all up and say, we have domestic violence, and then for a lot of these, the foundation of that or portion of this, addiction and mental health, right? And so I think that my brothers have heard me say a lot of times, I don't like the fact that there are times when things happen and it's like, oh, well, they're dealing with it's a mental issue, or, things like that, like the whole thing with the football player that abused his girlfriend and R. Kelly. We can actually bring that up because he's going through that now. And a lot of people said, well, his sister, molested him growing up and stuff like that. And so there's a lot of things that have a foundation of, like you were saying, things that happened to us in the past. So at what point do you draw the line of, well, it's okay because they were addicted to drugs, or they have a mental issue? Because I have a really big issue with people using those as excuses. So how do you feel about that? And where do you feel like that line should be drawn? I can forgive you, but at the same time, it's like, okay, you still did this, and that's still a problem.
Sandra, is this you want to chime in on that one? And Mike, we'll circle back to you afterward.
Absolutely, I will talk about that, because this is the thing. I don't like the word excuse. I like the word reason. We criminalize everything, and you notice something. We do that with preferential treatment. Back in the time when it was the war on drugs, you were criminals, you were predators, right? Super predators, even according to some narratives from the Clintons. And now with the opiate explosion and with this new war on drugs, now you need treatment. Now you're sick, and now you have a different issue. See how the narratives change because of the whole socialization behind it? Listen, I just believe that we perish from a lack of knowledge. Hosea 4:6 says that. And the more we know and the more we understand, the more informed we are. Now the more we're able to provide those viable solutions to all of these social determinants that we're talking about. And one that I really wanted to talk about was HIV, because HIV is disproportionately impacting the African American community, right? Mm-hmm. And so to your question, if you don't mind me taking a roundabout to answer that.
No, please go ahead.
Yeah. I grew up being socialized. You're seen and you're not heard, right? And so, and I'm going to go back and forth if you let me. Something that Pastor Thicklin said that's so very important is this is domestic violence is not gender-based. Violence is not gender-based. Listen, we don't fight against flesh and blood according to scriptures. And since I am a born-again believer that happens to be a counselor, I understand that this is not a flesh and blood fight. So when we're talking about men who perpetrate violence with women that perpetrate violence, I don't see men and women. I see energy. I see the spirit behind it. There was just this huge case not long ago of this beautiful woman. I believe she was part Hispanic, part white, killed this man because he saw some behaviors, some crazy making behaviors in her, and he cut it off. And because he cut it off, she said, "Oh, you trying to leave me?" The only way you're going to leave me is dead. This is a woman saying this. So we can't look at that. We got to lose that lens of socializing according to gender and look at what spirit, okay, is behind or operating within that person. Because this woman killed this man. She killed him when they arrested her and had her on that cam. You know, you're on that video cam in that interrogation room. She was singing and dancing. So we got mental health issues here as well. So back to the point here. I don't believe there is excuses. I do believe there's reasons. What is the line that we draw? I draw a line with awareness, okay? Because even Christ said from the cross, Father, forgive them for they know not what they do. There's some things that we must, yes, I had to be accountable for some things in my life, right? I had to be accountable for some actions that I did. Even though I didn't know really what I was doing, I still had to be held accountable for those actions. However, I think there's something to say, even in the criminal justice system, notice you get more time in prison when it's premeditated. Listen to that word, because premeditation said, I know what I was doing, I knew better, and I did it anyway. But there's so many crimes, there's so many things that we do that we don't know better. And that's when we need to extend grace. That's when we need to lose this very unforgiving disposition that says, you knew better, he knew better. I hear that all the time, especially among clinicians like myself. And when I hear that, my heart sinks for people that will be in their caseload or their client load, because they are not going to get the care, the unconditional positive regard. They're not going to get the attention that they need, okay, for them to overcome that, for them to change. And I have a mantra that I use in what I do. I don't throw people away. I grow people up. I don't throw anyone away, regardless, because I wasn't thrown away. And you're talking to someone who was raped at 7 years old by a stepfather after my parents' divorce, ran away from that and was sex trafficked at 11 years old by someone that looked just like me. So this is not even a race thing. So we got to get over all these labels that we love to throw around when we're talking, even though I will not get over reparations for the Black community. That's something that I write about. That's something that I stand on. That's something that must happen because God is a God of justice. However, when it comes to a lot of these things, at 11 years old, I'm going through trafficking by men who look like my dad, my uncle, my brother. And then ultimately they sold me to a white man. This is at the age of 11 years old. So you wonder why I ran to drugs, why I ran to suicidal ideation, why I ran to domestic violence, where I live with someone that put their hands on me, why I live with my own self-destructive behaviors, all of that, which, by the way, when I was in my 20s, ultimately led up to a full-blown AIDS. We don't use that word full-blown anymore, but it led up into an AIDS diagnosis. That's been over 30 years ago because I'm in my 50s now. But all of those social determinants happened to me for various reasons. But the main thing I want us to focus on tonight is we don't fight against flesh and blood. When I look at my brothers and my sisters calling each other the N-word, I'm looking at the spirit of a slave master that you're allowing to puppet your energy, where now we become the slave master's son. Black on black crime is just as high than police that's killing Black people. Does that justify it? Absolutely not. But it gives it a reason, right? So we're operating on these old energies. We're operating in this energy of the trauma inheritance and of transgenerational trauma, where we know not what we do. But when we know better, we should, by all intents and purposes, do better.
Yo, if you haven't, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and follow 5 Things Off the Wall on all platforms.